The Objective News Network, the largest mortgage fraud scam in U.S. history. Hello, everyone. This is John Hnatio reporting for the Objective News Network. Welcome to our broadcast for today, Monday, July 24th, 2023. Have you ever pulled out an old suit from your closet only to find that moths have eaten it away? Well, that is exactly what's happening to the fabric of our society. In this case, the moths are corrupt judges and greedy lawyers and bankers across our country. Take, for example, what corrupted judges and lawyers they allow to practice in their courtrooms are doing right now to let banks like J.P. Morgan Chase wantonly destroy the lives of thousands of Americans in the biggest national home mortgage fraud scheme in all of U.S. history. Many of us are still out there chasing what used to be called the American dream. One important aspect of the dream has always been owning your own home. In 2008, however, all of us were left with the legacy of the financial housing crisis, when Washington Mutual Bank, or WAMU for short, went under in the biggest bank failure in all of U.S. history. Now, the reasons for the failure of Washington Mutual Bank were many and varied, but there is one single common denominator that greatly contributed to the crisis. The single common denominator was the federal government's dismal, and I mean dismal, job in effectively overseeing the banking industry. Things have only gotten worse since the great WAMU collapse of 2008, with the more recent collapses of banks like Silicon Valley Bank that overextended the bounds of both reason and propriety in combination with the failure of proper government oversight. While WAMU's collapse was all about bad mortgages and the housing downturn, more recent bank failures have been attributed to continuing poor oversight and lack of stress testing by government oversight authorities. Looking back, we can easily point to the obvious failures of government policymakers and oversight officials in both the Bush and Obama administrations, who encouraged irresponsible mortgage lending practices while simultaneously falling asleep at the oversight wheel. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the Office of Thrift Supervision not only failed to do their jobs before and during the housing crisis of 2008, but even after the collapse contributed to chaos and the remarkable corruption that followed and continues to corrupt our entire economy. If any of us, however, think that the effects of the WAMU mortgage collapse in 2008 are now completely behind us, you would be terribly, terribly wrong. Today, there are literally thousands and thousands of our fellow Americans who are facing foreclosure on their homes, not because, as many of us would like to think, they were irresponsible people who simply did not want to pay their mortgages, but rather because they were victims of the failure of our own central government, our own leaders, and corrupt bankers themselves. It was then, and it still is, all about unbounded avarice and greed in the unsacred chase for easy money. With the collapse of WAMU in September 2008, J.P. Morgan Chase stepped in and purchased the safe assets of WAMU, things like car loans and credit card debt, the things that had less liability associated with them, and the things that they knew they could get their money back on. As businessmen, they knew also the tremendous potential value of the mortgage notes supposedly held by WAMU, but intentionally did not purchase them because they knew they represented an extraordinary risk and, if purchased, would represent a huge liability if things didn't go their way. No. Instead, J.P. Morgan Chase Bank was faced with the challenge of figuring out a way to make money on the still highly lucrative WAMU mortgage notes without assuming any of the liability normally associated with them. These liabilities stem from the fact that WAMU was a terribly misrun organization, and one of the biggest problems with mortgage notes is that they must be properly authenticated before you can ever foreclose on someone's house to recoup money. J.P. Morgan Chase also knew that some of the things they did in the immediate aftermath of the WAMU collapse to make more money exacerbated the problem of being able to authenticate the WAMU mortgage loans. You see, J.P. Morgan Chase and other big banks all got together in the aftermath of the WAMU collapse to figure a way around this lack of mortgage loan authentication required under the law. Their first step was to create what the banks called the Mortgage Electronic Repository System, or MERS for short. The banks did this because they were greedy and wanted to avoid the required by law recording fees to properly authenticate mortgage notes because they thought they could get around the law by digitizing the information instead of the required maintenance of the actual documents themselves. What's even more astounding is that the system has been approved by such government-sponsored agencies as the Federal National Mortgage Association, or Fannie Mae, the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, Freddie Mac, and the Government National Mortgage Association, Ginnie Mae, along with such government agencies as the Federal Housing Administration and the Department of Veterans Administration that are involved in granting housing loans. The California and Utah housing finance agencies and all major Wall Street rating agencies make use of it as well. This approval coming in the wake of criticism that MERS cannot tell you who actually is the current owner of a mortgage. Funny, isn't it? If you require physical documentation of mortgage notes, then how does MERS, an electronic database, satisfy the fundamental requirements of the law? Then J.P. Chase quietly stepped in and began to service the WAMU loans that had been placed in a trust for liquidation. The bank deceived thousands of homeowners by failing to tell them that they did not really own their mortgage notes because they, J.P. Morgan Chase, could not properly authenticate them as required as an absolute prerequisite for owning any mortgage note. If you cannot prove ownership, you cannot foreclose on someone's house. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. To add insult to injury, J.P. Morgan Chase, under threat of losing their homes, extorted homeowners across the country to refinance their now bogus WAMU mortgage notes that they did not really own, and then charged them to continue to make payments on the bogus mortgage notes. Oftentimes, the banks would increase interest rates to rates that homeowners could simply not afford, and simply sit back during the height of the Great Recession, as predatory lending vultures do, to swoop in when they can no longer make their payments and foreclose on their homes. J.P. Morgan Chase uses legions of lawyers and law firms to do the job of collecting debt and foreclosing on the homes of their victims. It is hard to believe that the lawyers involved representing J.P. Morgan Chase are not fully aware of the fraudulent scheme, but do it anyway since there is so much money involved, literally billions and billions of dollars. So much for the rules of professional ethics and the integrity of the entire legal profession. Now, talking about the legal profession, the same lawyers who make such a great living off the backs of their victims become judges. Judges know that their own futures, after retirement, as they go on in their career, rely on playing along to get along with their friends and colleagues out there making money. So they turn a blind eye to the corruption and suppress any evidence that might jeopardize their fraudulent scheme. Things like extortion, forged authentication of documents before the court, perjury before the tribunal, and so on, and so on, and so on. Under the law, they are what's called a racketeering influence corrupt organization, or RICO for short. In our next story, we will try and throw some mothballs in the closet of the corruption in New Jersey and across the country by focusing on some of the specific judges and lawyers who seem to be part of the home mortgage fraud enterprise, acting with such impunity as they destroy the lives of their fellow Americans. It is what it is for July 24th, 2023. This is John Hnatio reporting for the Objective News Network. Thanks for watching, and please tell your friends and colleagues about us.